All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going really big, like civilization level big.
Bigger, actually.
Oh, yeah.
How so?
Well, think about it. We're talking about rebuilding civilization from scratch. And our main source material, this book, How to Rebuild Civilization, is by Louis Dartnell, who, by the way, is an astrobiologist.
Okay, that's pretty big. So we're getting an astrobiologist's take on rebuilding society after, say, a huge collapse. That's kind of cool.
It is, and a little bit intimidating, too. I mean, this is someone who thinks about life on other planets.
You're right. That makes you wonder what kind of perspective they bring to this topic.
It's not just some survivalist fantasy. This is someone looking at it from a much broader, almost planetary scale.
Right, like what are the universal essentials?
Exactly. And thankfully, from what we can gather from the book reviews, Dartnell takes a very practical approach, almost like, a handbook for starting over.
Civilization 2.0.
Exactly. It's methodical. He covers agriculture, medicine, even engineering and governance.
So it's not just about surviving in the wilderness, right? No, it's about rebuilding entire systems.
No.
Everything from growing food to establishing laws and making sure people can, well, live together.
Okay, so this isn't just about learning to make fire. It's about how you build a functioning society from the ground up.
Precisely. And the review also mentions Dartnell draws heavily on history, which makes a lot of sense,
For
right?
sure. I mean, if you want to rebuild something,
Hmm.
it helps to know what worked and what didn't in the past. The review also mentions a book called Collapse by Jared Diamond. Have you read that one?
Yeah, I have. It's a pretty sobering look at how societies throughout history have either flourished or totally failed based on the choices they made. What's interesting is that it ties into Dartnell's book perfectly.
How so?
Well, it's like Dartnell is using these historical case studies as a guide, cautionary tales, or maybe even inspiration for what to do and not do when rebuilding after a collapse.
Oh, it's like learning from the past, but for the future. Like, okay, the Romans, they built a pretty impressive empire, but they also made some pretty huge mistakes that ultimately led to their downfall.
Exactly. And wouldn't it be helpful if we could avoid those same pitfalls when rebuilding civilization?
I mean, it's like having a blueprint, but also knowing which parts of the plan might be prone to, like, spontaneous combustion based on past renovations.
That's a great analogy. And it emphasizes how vital understanding history can be. It's not just about dates and names, it's about patterns of human behavior, what works, what doesn't. That becomes super relevant if you're starting from scratch.
So thinking about, how did the Roman Empire collapse? How did ancient civilizations deal with things like climate change or pandemics? Those kinds of insights could be super useful.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of history. It gives us this incredible context and a deeper understanding of the challenges we face now and the ones we might face in the future.
It's not a crystal ball, but it can help us prepare.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the practical handbook approach, the historical lessons learned. What else is Dartnell emphasizing?
Knowledge preservation. He really stresses how vital it is to make sure certain information isn't lost if, well, things go south. The book review even mentions A Canticle for Leibowitz. Have you heard of it?
I haven't. What is it?
It's a science fiction novel that explores this exact idea of preserving knowledge after a societal collapse. Imagine a world that loses almost all of its knowledge and has to painstakingly rediscover everything over centuries.
Wow. So what, like monks hiding scrolls in a post-apocalyptic library?
That's pretty close, actually. It really drives home how fragile knowledge can be and how crucial it is to protect what we've learned as a species.
It makes you think, in a scenario like that, what knowledge would you consider absolutely essential to save? Like if you could only pass on three things to future generations, what would they be?
That's a big question. Is it practical skills, scientific principles, philosophical ideas, maybe even artistic expressions? What is essential for rebuilding not just a civilization, but a meaningful human existence?
Okay, that's getting pretty deep. But
Yeah.
you're right. It's not just about rebuilding structures. It's about rebuilding culture, values, even hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of rebuilding, the review also touched on the role of technology and innovation.
Yeah, that's a huge part of Dartnell's book. It makes sense. Technology is basically humanity's giant toolbox, but the question is, which tools do we need for this specific job?
And how do we use them responsibly?
Exactly. We don't want to just repeat the same mistakes that might have led to the collapse in the first place.
So it's not about rejecting all technology.
No, it's about being very strategic and mindful about what we choose to rebuild.
Like I'm thinking renewable energy.
Absolutely. Sustainable agriculture techniques. Maybe even something as simple as the printing press, which could be crucial for disseminating knowledge.
So in a way, we'd be curating a technology tree for a new civilization, choosing the branches that lead towards a more sustainable and resilient future.
It's a fascinating idea, and it brings up another aspect that Dartnell focuses on, the human element.
What do you mean?
Well, you can have all the survival skills and tech in the world, but if you can't get people to work together, to agree on basic rules and trust each other, you're not going to get very far.
It's like, what good is knowing how to farm if everyone is fighting with the same patch of land?
Exactly. It'll just be chaos.
So how does Dartnell approach this whole social aspect of rebuilding? How do you get people to cooperate when, everything's falling apart?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, and that's what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive. Because Dartnell doesn't just focus on the how-to of survival, he explores the even bigger question of how to rebuild a functional, just, and hopefully even better society.
Okay, that's a cliffhanger. Stay tuned, listeners, because we'll be back soon to explore the challenges and possibilities of building a new world from the ground up. Welcome back to the deep dive.
So before the break, we were talking about the challenge of getting people to cooperate when rebuilding civilization. How do you even start with that, right? It's not an easy thing. I mean, imagine everything's gone, resources are scarce, tensions are high. How do you even begin to establish some kind of order, some sort of, I don't know, structure?
Yeah, and not just any structure, but a functional one, preferably one that's, fair and just and doesn't just devolve into some post-apocalyptic dictatorship.
Exactly. And that's where Dartnell really makes you think. He forces us to consider what kind of governance would actually work in a scenario like that. Do we try to replicate the systems we have now, or do we need something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, is democracy even feasible when you're starting from scratch? Or would, like, a more authoritarian approach be more efficient, at least in the beginning?
It's a tough question, and I don't think there's an easy answer, but Dartnell seems to suggest that for it to work, you need a balance. You need strong leadership to provide direction, but you also need a system that allows for input and participation from everyone.
Okay, so not a dictatorship, but also not complete anarchy.
Right, because ultimately you need people to buy into the system for it to work long term. If people feel like they have no voice, no say in how things are run, then you're just setting yourself up for more conflict down the line.
It's like, yeah, you might be able to force people to do things for a while, but eventually that's going to lead to rebellion or just a complete breakdown of the social order.
Exactly. And that's where the whole idea of social cooperation comes in. I mean, that's really at the heart of Dartnell's argument. You can't rebuild anything if people aren't willing to work together.
It makes sense. You need people to share resources, to help each other out, especially when things are tough.
Absolutely. But, that's easier said than done, right? I mean, imagine you're in a post-collapse world, resources are limited, everyone's stressed out, scared. It's hard to imagine everyone just playing nice and sharing everything equally.
Right. Like, I'm all for community spirit and sharing, but what happens when there's only one can of food left? Who gets it? How do you prevent things from devolving into, like, a Mad Max free-for-all?
That's where having a clear set of rules and a system for enforcing those rules becomes crucial. It's not just about being nice, it's about creating a sense of order and fairness, even when resources are scarce.
So it's about establishing a system of justice, of conflict resolution, that everyone agrees to abide by.
Right, and this ties back to what we were talking about earlier, knowledge preservation. Because if you lose that knowledge, if you forget how to resolve conflicts peacefully, how to govern fairly, then you're just repeating the same mistakes that led to the collapse in the first place.
It's like, okay, you might know how to build a shelter and grow food, but if you don't know how to build a fair and just society, then what's the point? You're just surviving, not really thriving.
Exactly. And that's where things get really complex because it requires a deep understanding of human psychology, of sociology, of history even.
It's like we need to understand not just how to rebuild the physical infrastructure of a society, but the social infrastructure as well.
Absolutely. And Dartnell doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he does provide a framework for thinking about these issues, which I think is incredibly valuable.
Okay, so we've talked about this sci-fi book, A Canticle for Leibowitz, that explores the idea of preserving knowledge after collapse. But does it offer any insights into how to actually rebuild a society, like on a practical level?
It does, in a way. One of the main themes is the idea that history repeats itself. The world in the book goes through these cycles of advancement and then collapse, and knowledge is lost and rediscovered over and over.
Kind of like a warning then about not learning from our mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. It emphasizes the need to understand the patterns of history so that we can break these cycles of destruction and actually build something better, something that lasts.
So it's not just about preserving knowledge, it's about understanding how to use it wisely.
Right. And that's something that's relevant to us even now in our current society. I mean, look at the challenges we're facing. Climate change, social inequality, political polarization. We can learn a lot from the mistakes of past societies and hopefully avoid making the same ones ourselves.
So this whole conversation about rebuilding civilization, it's not just some hypothetical thought experiment.
It's a way of thinking about the problems we face now and trying to find solutions that are more sustainable, more resilient in the long run.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects.
It's about developing a mindset of preparedness, of adaptability, of being willing to learn from the past and apply those lessons to the present.
And speaking of the past, earlier we were talking about the idea of a technology tree for a new civilization. We mentioned things like renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, the printing press. But what about technologies that might actually hinder the rebuilding process? Things that we might be better off leaving behind?
It's a good question, and it's something Dartnell addresses in the book. He argues that we need to be really careful about technologies that are inherently unsustainable, things that deplete resources or pollute the environment.
Okay, so maybe we don't need to bring back fossil fuels. What else?
Well, he also talks about the dangers of technologies that promote social division and inequality.
So like social media algorithms that are designed to manipulate people's emotions and create echo chambers.
Exactly. It's about being very intentional about the kind of world we want to rebuild and choosing technologies that align with those values.
It's like we almost need to develop a set of ethical guidelines for evaluating technology, especially in a post-collapse scenario.
Absolutely. We have to ask ourselves, does this technology promote cooperation or conflict? Does it contribute to our long-term survival, or does it threaten it?
These are big questions, and they're not easy to answer.
No, they're not. But they're questions we need to be thinking about.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking about the role of technology in our lives. And not just in some hypothetical post-apocalyptic future, but right now. What technologies are we choosing to embrace? What are we choosing to reject? And what are the consequences of those choices?
That's a powerful question. And I think it's one of the most valuable things we can take away from this whole discussion.
It's not just about prepping for some doomsday scenario. It's about being more mindful, more intentional about the choices we make every day.
Absolutely. And it's about being adaptable, being able to adjust to changing circumstances and find creative solutions to unexpected problems.
It's like maybe we don't need a full-blown apocalypse to start thinking about these things.
Maybe not. Maybe the lessons we learn from thinking about how to rebuild civilization can actually help us build a better world right now.
I like that. So we've talked about the importance of knowledge, of technology, of social cooperation, but what about the actual skills and knowledge people would need to survive and rebuild?
Well, that's where we'll be focusing in the last part of our deep dive. Because Dartnell doesn't just philosophize about rebuilding, he actually provides a pretty detailed roadmap for developing the skills and knowledge you would need to thrive in a new world.
So we're going from the theoretical to the practical.
Exactly. We're going to be looking at the essential skills and knowledge for building a better future, even if we have to start from scratch.
Okay, get ready to take notes, listeners, because things are about to get really interesting. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've talked about the big ideas, the historical context, the social challenges, but let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah, let's talk practical skills. What do people actually need to know to survive and rebuild after,
After the world goes a little sideways.
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing to theorize about sustainable tech and governance, but what about the actual hands-on stuff? The nuts and bolts of rebuilding.
Right, like what are the top 3 skills that would make you the most useful person in a post-collapse world?
Tough question. But I'd say number 1 absolutely has to be agriculture.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. You got to eat.
More than that, you gotta know how to grow food reliably and sustainably if you want to build a real society, not just, survive for a few weeks. Forget foraging berries. We're talking real food production.
So I guess those weekend gardening classes might actually pay off someday.
They might. It's interesting Dartnell points out how disconnected most of us are from where our food comes from.
I know, right? Like, I can barely keep a house plant alive.
He sees that as a real vulnerability. Knowing how to grow food, even just the basics, could make a huge difference in a crisis situation.
Okay, agriculture, check. What's next?
I'd say basic engineering and construction skills,
Yeah.
being able to build shelter, manage water, create sanitation systems.
Yeah, because surviving the initial, I don't know, event, whatever it might be, that's one thing. But then you got to figure out how to actually live.
Right. You need a place to stay, clean water to drink, and a way to, well, deal with waste.
Let's not forget about the toilets.
Important, yeah. And again, it's not about becoming a master builder or plumber. It's about understanding basic principles.
So, if the pipes burst, I know what to do.
More or less, yeah. It's about resourcefulness, being able to make do with what you have, fix things when they break.
Okay, 2 down, 1 to go. What's the final skill for our post-apocalypse all-star?
This one might surprise you. Communication and social skills.
Really? I was thinking, like, maybe wilderness medicine or something.
Important, sure. But remember, rebuilding a civilization, that's a team effort. You can't do it alone.
Okay, yeah, you need to be able to get people to work together.
Exactly. You need to build trust, resolve conflicts, inspire people. That takes communication, empathy, the ability to connect with others.
So all those years of awkward small talk at parties, maybe those were actually secretly prepping me for the apocalypse.
Well, maybe. It's all about being adaptable, right?
Yeah.
Using the skills you have in unexpected ways.
So it's not just about physical skills. It's about being, I don't know, emotionally intelligent too.
Right.
Yeah, being able to navigate the complexities of human interaction, that's going to be crucial in any kind of rebuilding effort.
It's like suddenly being a good listener is a survival skill.
It is, and a good communicator, and a peacemaker maybe.
Okay, so agriculture, engineering, and people skills. That's our post-collapse starter pack.
Sounds about right.
You know, it's interesting. We started this deep dive talking about how to rebuild civilization, but it feels like we've ended up talking about how to just be a better human being in general.
I think that's the point, isn't it? The skills and knowledge that would help us rebuild after a collapse, those are the same skills and knowledge that can help us build a better world right now.
It's about being resourceful, resilient, compassionate.
It's about being curious, about learning, about constantly adapting to new situations.
So maybe this whole deep dive wasn't just about prepping for the apocalypse. Maybe it was about something more.
Maybe it was about rediscovering what it means to be human, what it takes to build a community, a society that's truly worth preserving.
Food for thought, for sure. Well, on that note, dear listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
From the collapse of civilization to the practicalities of starting over, we've explored a lot of ground, and hopefully we've given you some things to think about, maybe even some things to act on.
And we hope you'll continue to explore these ideas, delve deeper into the books we've mentioned, and share your own thoughts and insights with us.
Yeah, because this conversation about how we build a better future, that's a conversation that needs to continue, and it's a conversation that we can all be a part of.
So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep building that better future one step at a time.
And thanks for joining us on the deep dive.